Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for making the time to join us today at the Earth Engine virtual meetup. I'm Sabrina Zito. I'm a geospatial consultant based near Munich in Germany, and I've been running these virtual meetups since the last in-person Geo for Good in 2019. So we're really excited to have you here. And we're also on YouTube. This is also being live streamed at the moment. If you go to bit.ly/EEVM-YouTube, you can see all the presentations where the presenters have agreed to share on our YouTube channel. And there are also usually some links to maybe the slides that the presenter provided or a paper that they published or some code. So it's probably a great place for you to check out as well and watch some of the previous presentations that we've had. So I'm really excited to tell you about the last session for the spring season. It's going to be on May 12th this year at the same time, and we're going to experiment with a community chat setting where basically it's a time for us to network, share ideas, meet other community members. And I'm going to run a poll right after this where we're going to pick the various themed topics. And the most popular ones will be set as the theme for the room. And then you're free to wander through the rooms, meet people, talk to people. I think now that a lot of us are still living in some sort of lockdown or restricted life, we kind of miss this opportunity to meet other people and share ideas. So this will be a great opportunity for that. And starting with the upcoming meeting, and we'll be using the Berlin Code of Conduct for this event. So feel free to check that out as well. And so I'd like to invite you first to go to slido.com. The event code is #EEVM. And this will take you to a page where we're going to have a quick poll right now to get some of your thoughts about what are the themes for some of these rooms at the upcoming community chats next month. Okay, so let me switch over to that poll here. So if you could go to slido.com and type in #EEVM, this will be a place where you can start sharing the topics you have in mind. So someone in the chat asked if it's being recorded. If you're referring to this meeting, yes, this meeting is being recorded, but the community chats will not be recorded. It's just going to be a virtual networking space, so there will be no recording of any conversations. So we have one topic here, land cover mapping / monitoring. Anyone else would like to share some topics you have in mind? In addition to like topics or fields of study, it could also be more focused on specific things like, user interface, building an app, or using Earth Engine in research or in teaching, or for applications commercially or things like that. So it could be quite a wide variety of topics. And maybe we can also have some rooms where, it's focused on students who are learning Earth Engine and want to use that for future job applications, things like that. So it's pretty flexible as to what the topics can be. So I'd encourage you to, definitely add in your ideas. This poll is going to stay open for a week. And I'm also going to be sharing the link to this poll on Twitter. So people will also be adding their thoughts. So now I'm going to head back to the slides here. Yeah, we're really excited to have Emil Cherrington here today with us. You might know him on Twitter as well as BZGeo. And this is a wonderful account to follow if you don't already follow. I've seen just some really amazing updates on what SERVIR is doing, but also on Earth Engine related tips and tricks, job postings, Earth observations, news, new data sources, following Emil and learning from his science communication skills. And we're really excited to have him today talking about SERVIR applications leveraging Google Earth Engine. And I'm going to let him tell you a bit more about SERVIR. It's a partnership between NASA, USAID, and they're just doing really awesome stuff with Earth observation for the Sustainable Development Goals. So without further ado, I'm going to stop screen sharing here and then let Emil take over the screen.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sabrina, and thank you to everybody today for your kind attention. Let me just share my screen and do that. And just so you know, I guess I've changed up the lineup a wee bit. So, well, per the title about using Earth Engine toward Sustainable Development Goal monitoring, I wanted to share a little bit about some of the work that I and other colleagues are doing, but which is still still really in the development phase. But have some questions for you out there in TV land, as it were, or you in the audience, that I think some of this stuff is probably relevant to what you're working on. And so it's a lot of the stuff isn't completely cooked or completely baked, but nonetheless, we'll share it with you. So talk a little bit about sustainable development goals, just to give you some context and say, well, you'll see kind of why I'm talking about Belize in just a wee bit. But the country Belize, which inspired the Twitter handle Belize Geo, has, like so many other countries in the tropics, has dealt with different types of environmental issues. And kind of as you see highlighted in the MODIS image that's on my separate screen, so if you see me glance over, that's why. There was a large algal bloom in 2009, and there was 2009, yeah, or rather 2011, as it said there. But there was a large algal bloom in the Belize Barrier Reef Lagoon, and satellite imagery at that time was key to kind of looking at what was happening, although there were many reports coming from folks in the field. And then also, as indicated in the little screenshot that I've taken from a national report that was done, there were also other things. And so I think overall in Belize, the environmental community is aware that what happens on the land also affects what happens in Belizean waters. And just to say too that a large part of the country's gross domestic product, the GDP, comes from tourism related to the Barrier Reef, which is the second largest in the Western Hemisphere, in the world, sorry, and the largest in the Western Hemisphere. And so again, satellite imagery played a role in monitoring what was happening, but also kind of helped to raise awareness as to, hey, there are tools out there that can be used for looking at what's happening. A few years ago, I and some other colleagues were able to put together a successful proposal to NASA for a project that's called, Climate Influenced Nutrient Flows and Threats to the Biodiversity of the Belize Barrier Reef System. In short, we call it the BZSDG project. And for those of you who might not be familiar with SDGs, I'll tell you a little bit about that, but just to say that the project involves a few of us at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, where I'm based, also the Wildlife Conservation Society, the University of Georgia, and the NASA Jet Propulsion Lab. And so just to kind of walk it back a little bit and talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, governments of the world signed on to the Sustainable Development Goals back in 2015, and they have these overarching objectives, looking at things like Goal 14, trying to protect life below water, Goal 15, trying to protect life on land. And so the project that we currently have, in which GE code will factor into, has a lot to do with, can we use Earth observation data to address, how the country of Belize and the government specifically is addressing implementation of those goals, meeting those goals. Not to get into all the details of that, but just to say that the way how the Sustainable Development Goals overall are structured, they have these targets and they have these indicators, no? And so, for instance, with Goal 14, Life Below Water, it talks about sustainable management of marine and coastal resources as one of the targets, and one of the indicators that they have tied to that is, how much seascape our countries protecting. And in the contrast, for instance, if we look at 15 and Goal 15.2, target 15.2 rather, they're talking about halting deforestation by 2020. We're already in 2021, and I'm sure that some of you, since I know that some of you work on issues related to land cover, might have seen a recent report coming out of the Global Forest Watch from the World Resources Institute. I believe it was last week, talking about how deforestation definitely spiked or was higher in 2020 compared to previous years. So let's just say that the overall target there for halting deforestation across the world by 2020 likely not met, and we anticipate that deforestation is just going to likely continue up to a certain point. But the main takeaway from all of this is, at the international level, different countries have agreed to protect marine resources, to try to halt things like deforestation and protect terrestrial resources. And when you're looking at those indicators and those targets, I'm sure that you're also tying back that Earth observation data can play a key role in those. So again, we wrote up a project. Our big focuses are goals 14 and 15. And we have listed there some of the objectives. And what I'm gonna do is kind of walk you through maybe some of the specific ways that we're using Earth Engine to try to address some of those things. And so let's see, next slide. I think that there we go. So yeah, and of course our geographic focus for this project is Belize, which, if I haven't said it before, it's a small country in Central America, fairly close to the US, also shares Caribbean coast. And when I think about all that stuff, and what our project is doing, I'd like to harken back to this painting, which some of you might have seen, some of you might never have seen, but I'm sure that you've all familiar with the concept. This little cup here, and so the name of the painting is The Damsel of the Saint Grail, or another translation for that is the Holy Grail. And I'd like to think, and again, noting that a number of people on this call are working on, looking at some bigger issues like, hey, how can we use satellites to track deforestation, et cetera? One of the holy grails, as it were, regarding using Earth observation data, using satellites to look at deforestation, has to do with, can we make classifications better, or rather, can we, using platforms like Earth Engine and other platforms, can we come up with a perfect classification? So think of that as the holy grail that I think a number of people are working on. And of course, shout out to Jen Hurd, who I see also here in the participant list, and I had the opportunity to see her excellent talk a few months back, where she also talked about using Earth Engine to look at forest issues in Canada. So still a little bit more in terms of context, but I think that most of us weren't born into Earth Engine, to use that metaphor. I think a lot of us have come to Earth Engine from some other platform before, and way back when, now more than a decade ago, I worked on classification using multiple years worth of Landsat data to again evaluate how forest cover was changing over Belize. And the map that you see there, which I hope you can still see. I see something there in the chat. It's from Jen. Okay. The map that you can see there on the right is just kind of showing you the pattern of where the deforestation is. In the black lines, we have the protected areas coverage, and you know, if there's kind of one takeaway that you can have just from the map itself, it's that the deforestation that occurred over that 30-year period from 1980 to 2010 largely occurred outside of protected areas. Another takeaway that you won't get from the map is that, you know, when we look at the workflow that I put there on the left-hand side, you know, a traditional workflow outside of Earth Engine where you have to look for and pick your imagery, you got to download the data, you got to extract it, you got to unzip it, you got to composite it, you got to mosaic it together, you got to do your corrections, you do your classification. Of course, it's, you know, it's not finished there. There's post classification, etc. And so part of it was, you know, and I see, you know, Fiona talking about mosaicing taking the longest time. I've always found the process of just looking for the data or you know, I guess it is part of the mosaicing or the compositing process. If you're picking imagery from different time periods, et cetera, it's a pain. And of course, you know, if you're doing it on the desktop, more of a pain than you know, what we have now with Earth Engine. So where am I going with this? You know, taking a little step back as well, and you know, just kind of what's happening in the community, and kind of, you know, why does Sabrina, you know, why is she taking on the monumental task of bringing the community together every month and kind of talking about some of these things and issues. I recall seeing a post, it was back in January, where people were complaining about another platform that's not Earth Engine, where the data was now not going to be free any longer, and you know, the pain that was going to come from that. And just, you know, neat little Kermit the Frog meme there. It's like, you know, you can use Earth, you know, you can use all that data for free on the cloud if you use Earth Engine. And so again, acknowledging that there are, you know, people who will, you know, pick different platforms, etc. But the long and the short, combining this meme with the previous graphic that I was trying to show, using Earth Engine certainly will cut down a lot of time and allow you to do other things. Maybe this slide is a little outplaced, but kind of, you know, again, why is Emil talking about Belize? I think for some of the things that other folks on the line too are talking about, and if we compare it to Canada, for instance, we're talking about a relatively small country that's only, you know, it's less than 23,000 square kilometers, only spans 3 Landsat scenes. I don't know how many Landsat scenes Jennifer Hurd and colleagues are using when they're looking at like all of Canada. It's a country with forests, and of course, when you're from the country, maybe you have a vested interest in wanting to do work the place you're from. So Sabrina, you know, mentioned that I, you know, I'm kind of active on the social media, talking about different things. And so one of the cool things that I thought was, you know, Earth Engine apps. And so one of the apps that we put together, and it's related to our project, there you see the cool little icon on the bottom there. Earth Engine apps certainly allow you to share your outputs really simply. And what if you combine this Earth Engine app with a tweet and kind of share with other people what you're doing so that they can critique that or provide feedback, et cetera, et cetera. The long and the short, you know, hey, with Earth Engine, it's possible to come up with really cool stuff that you can share with other people. And Jennifer is saying that, you know, if you want to work on Canada, you've got to work on 48 Landsat scenes, which doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun, but sure. So, and again, please forgive me for you know, giving a whole lot of context and stuff. But one of the other things that I and other colleagues worked on way back when, in parallel to this Belize work, worked on mapping land cover at, say, a bigger scale. So Belize being the little area we're seeing here in this part of Central America. It's the northernmost country in Central America. Here's all the rest, you know, spanning all the way down to Panama. And just gonna say that map was produced through a process of working with representatives from the different Central American countries. Here's, you know, here's Wilfredo Fuentes, late analyst who was from the Ministry of the Environment of El Salvador, kind of showing and giving comment on the work that had been done. Here were spectral signatures that came out of that, etc. And what went into that, a MODIS mosaic that took 120 days worth of data. And if I can just go back to this just to say, producing the mosaic, producing the land cover map that you see here took, quite honestly, 2 years worth of work. Earth Engine didn't exist in those times. That's one part of it. And so, just going forward, just to say, without cloud-based platforms, we realize that things can get really complicated, especially when you're using a lot of data, relatively speaking, and it's all relative because, again, even Central America, it's drop in the bucket compared to the size of the US or Canada or what have you. And just to give an example and kind of jump straight into those, we were able to take sample, as it were, some of the areas that were classified in this effort, and then pull those samples into Earth Engine to then generate, also based on MODIS data, different types of land cover maps for the nation of Belize. And so unfortunately, I didn't do a great job in terms of like labeling, what the specific classes are and what specifically you're looking at, like what's the differences between both. But just to say that in green we have, dark green we have forest, lighter green we have dark green we have broadleaf forest, light green we have other types of forest. In the other colors, the reds are the urban areas, the magentas are the savannas. In blue, in theory, we're looking at deep water, etc. And what I wanted to kind of share here was just kind of say, depending on how you tweak the algorithms that you're using in Earth Engine, how you tweak these samples, and both of these are actually based off of random forests with 100 to 200 trees. We come up with different looking maps, but overall the pattern is similar. And of course, with Earth Engine, depending on the input mosaics you're using, you'll also get different things. And so if I'm remembering correctly, one mosaic that we're seeing relies on, MODIS mosaic from 1 month's worth of data, the other one based on 3 months worth of data, and you can kind of see some of the artifacts coming up in the resulting maps that we're seeing. And again, this is based on MODIS. Obviously we can do other things using Landsat, but the takeaway there is it all depends on the ingredients that you are baking with, and I guess also our skill in combining those ingredients. And of course, one other thing to kind of note here as well, in case anybody was kind of noticing there, this darker color, it escapes me the specific name of that color, it's not water. It's supposed to be mangrove. And while we see in the map on the right, the water for the most part, seems to be classified well. Teal, there we go. Thank you, Sabrina. In the teal color, we're looking at mangrove areas. And while in the map on the right, we see the water areas being pretty well classified. Again, depending on the type of MODIS input we're using, and we're using this MCD43 A4 product. If we use 3 months over here versus 1 month over here, it looks like there's enough noise, as it were, in even the water data to kind of confuse water and mangrove. And of course, mangrove forests, some of them, they are, you have vegetation over flooded areas. You also see kind of other artifacts popping up. Yeah, and so that's kind of one thing. Originally, when I was putting together these slides, I had this, super ambitious idea for what I was going to throw in here and, impress all you guys and stuff, all you folks in a gender neutral way with like, hey, I want to show you guys how we can, kind of test the limits of of Earth Engine, etc. Needless to say, I'm pretty sure I'm falling flat in terms of that goal for this presentation, but I know that other folks have shown some really awesome things in the previous presentations, which again, I see that as one of the questions that the broader community is answering with events like this. And Ate from Deltaris and SERVIR Mekong also gave a really interesting talk a few months ago about, expanding upon Earth Engine by using approaches like TensorFlow to kind of test the limits of what's possible. So again, just kind of me going back into, memory lane and some of the cool things or the discussions that I've seen on Twitter, where people like, I don't want to share my code and all that good stuff. Said, you know what? I'm going to share with you guys the algorithm, even if I'm only sharing with you a screenshot. But no. Seriously speaking, in a few slides, I'm actually going to share with you the code for some of the stuff that I'm working on. But what did I want to show here? I don't know how the other folks, and please feel free to post that to say something in the chat about that. I have no idea how other folks kind of manage when you're doing like umpteen runs on Earth Engine. I make folders in my repos, and then I just make a whole bunch of things with different runs like RF10 or RF11A. Is the algorithm free? It's just Earth Engine code. I'm just gonna share it out there in a wee bit. But yeah, I make all these different versions, etc., and that's how I kind of deal with version control. But kind of what did the classifier look like? As I mentioned before, I sampled some data from an existing map. I've made multiple types of samples using different levels of classes, and take different inputs and just kind of like, all right, let me try with these with X number of forests. Let me tweak which input bands I'm going to use. And to be honest, what I'm showing here, I think I'm using the exact same input bands in all of them. I'm using the exact same number of trees in all of this, but I am changing the inputs, and I'm going to show you guys some of those outputs and probably bring this to a close in a wee bit. But before saying that, just going to say, in terms of other resources that I think are pretty useful for folks to know about, Lantrender. I know that Justin Bratton, who is co-author on the Lantrender work, has shared his code in the meetups before. They put together some really awesome stuff that, the long story short, allows us to do some harmonizing and harmonizing of Landsat data. There's a link. We'll share the stuff later, etc. Dinner time, shortcakes, awesome stuff in the chat. One thing that I don't know that's say publicly out there, but one can use Lantrender, the algorithm, not only to look at changes, but you can also actually use it to standardize between image dates. And so I'm going to hop into this. So if we use some of the standard code that's out there for mapping, for doing a mosaic, mosaic might look like what you see here on the left. However, if we used Robert Kennedy's tweaked code, you can actually then fit and essentially remove some of the noise from the Landsat data and get a slightly different mosaic that you see over here on the right. And again, my apologies if both of them look really similar to you. They do, but they will provide you with different types of outputs. And so, without further ado, I'd like you folks' kind of thoughts as to which of these outputs do you think is the best? And so here is one version of the random forest algorithm run on the Lantrender fitted Landsat mosaic we use. Here's one using CART. Here's one using the minimum distance algorithm. Here's one using the naive Bayes, and checking with Nick Clinton from the Earth Engine team. Said that the naive Bayes one is basically like another version of maximum likelihood classification, and kind of the Earth Engine team, like, why don't you guys have MLC as one of the algorithms available in Earth Engine? Here's another version of the random forest here on the left, and another version of the random forest here on the right. A fourth version, and of course, an SVM version. And what if we just, kind of filter the output from the SVM differently, kind of what that is showing. And again, maybe kind of in the interest of time and stuff, to kind of just walk you through it quickly, kind of what we see as some of the things. The naive Bayes output that we're seeing, and you can choose to agree or disagree, certainly looks noisier than some of the other outputs. The minimum distance one, overall, you're probably seeing that it has more green than, say, some of the other ones, like the cart or the random forests. However, with the minimum distance one, if we pay attention to certain parts of the map, it does seem like it's essentially missing some of the deforestation. So for instance, the cart one shows a lot more or less forest cover in these areas than seem to be picked up in the minimum distance classification. And again, the naive Bayes classification just seems, or the output, rather noisy. And in the different other versions of the random forest ones, you can literally see that in one map, something might be labeled one way, and in another map it's labeled differently. And again, you see little salt and pepper patches that show up in some of the classifications and don't in others. And we figure it might also have to do with the mosaicing process. So, again, the whole thing about, garbage in, garbage out, don't want to say it that way, but kind of depending on how the inputs you're using, you might be using inputs that generate a whole lot of noise. And so just to say that it's all a work in progress that we're doing in evaluating the outputs of some of these things. And of course, when we look at the different types of filtered maps, we lose detail in terms of some of the changes that were highlighted there. So I've said a bit. Wanted to also share with you the code. I'll share the slides afterwards. I also actually, over a year ago, just to kind of put some of the stuff out there into the world, shared examples of some of the code that we were working on, or samples of things. I like when folks are kind and put their code out there into the world. It helps with some of our workflows. And let's see, if there's time for another really short demo, to kind of take some of this back to a different realm, the marine realm. So I might have to stop sharing and reshare. So one second. So one moment, share screen, and I just gotta find the correct one. Here we go. Okie dokie. So also in terms of code management, just to say that, also related to the project that we are doing, looking at some marine work, another collaborator, or co-I rather, Dr. Christine Lee from NASA JPL, she's leading an effort that's looking at water quality. And then tangential to that, we're also interested in looking at, we're interested in looking at marine ecosystems. And so again, stuff is not completely baked yet, et cetera, but wanted to kind of show you some things that maybe didn't work out so great. So let's see. I'm sure that, some folks probably think, running code on a live demo, et cetera, doesn't necessarily always work out, but okay, here we go. Not too bad of an example. Another similar exercise where we are taking an existing ecosystem map, in this case, a marine ecosystem map, sampling off of that map. That's the training data set that you see here in the code. Taking some imagery, Sentinel-2 imagery that we've composited through a complicated process that we found some literature on and some workflows for. And just to show that, you know what, just by sampling an existing map, we can come up with you know, ways to update existing ones. However, one of the things we want to kind of highlight here, depending on the algorithm, but probably also depending on, you know, how we're parameterizing those algorithms, depending on how we are, you know, the imagery inputs that we're using, just with the exact same input, but just with different parameterization, we might come up with some, you know, drastically different things, like we can see here in terms of, you know, what's mapping as coral reef versus what's mapping as, you know, deep water, etc. And again, since I've done really badly in terms of labeling classes and stuff, I'll just say that the magenta areas that we're seeing over here, the magenta areas should be coral reefs. And these are mapped better, but not perfectly, we'd say, when we're using something like this maximum likelihood, or not maximum likelihood classifications, show the naive Bayes one, versus when we're using minimum distance classifier, where actually here, if I just, you know, do a quick comparison between the two, in the naive Bayes one, it shows coral reef, you know, if I in this band here, that I can assure you, if I turn all of them off, there's no coral reef in that position or in that spot. However, that's what the algorithm is indicating, versus when I just use a minimum distance one, comes up with, you know, distributions for coral reefs and overall for marine ecosystems that are, say, more believable. And again, you know, could have to do with how we are parameterizing or not parameterizing the algorithm that you see there, and also could have a lot to do with the input imagery, because again, for lots of the different outputs that we're seeing, whether it's random forest or CART, we're seeing striping patterns that seem to go back to the original Sentinel data that went into that classification. And so, starting to wrap up, just to say that, oh, that's all stuff that we have to figure out the, you know, we have to fully cook all of that work, but just to say some of the challenges that we're dealing with for that stuff. And so going forward, you know, is the tensor, I think you can see the screen here with the slides. Question going back to Ate's presentation from a few months ago, so is going the TensorFlow route absolutely necessary for some of the stuff that we're looking at, like land cover classification, etc. Fiona has a neat comment there in the chat, also related to what we're seeing. I'll come back to that. But, you know, is it sufficient to use the classifiers and the different approaches that we can just in the code editor? Or do we need to do something more complex, like using TensorFlow? You folks be the judges, and of course, I know that different members of the community, we're all working on different things, but would really be interested in kind of hearing about, you know, people who are working on similar things with land cover change, etc. Some of the obstacles you are also running into, or how you've surmounted those obstacles, or things that, you know, you've gotten to work really well. Of course, going to acknowledge that training data and input imagery are one part of the equation. And of course, the overall approach as it were. And Allison, yeah, definitely agree with you. If, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If we can do something that looks, or not just looks, but I guess is evaluated to be decent without having to do a workflow that's, or an approach that's super complicated, then that's probably what we want to do. But yeah, so VSF is better than R. I will wrap up by saying that, you know, just back to Sabrina's point, and I guess the upcoming Earth Engine meetup, kind of, you know, the community of folks who are out there on the Twitterverse and social media and stuff, they're really interested too in what everybody is working on. And so I'd also be interested, whether it's in the chat or Slido or whatever, and hearing about what some of the rest of the folks on the line are also working on. And of course, just to encourage you that we do have a weekly EOChat thing that we're doing where we just, kind of highlight what people are doing. So feel free to use hashtag EOChat in the future. And with that, I will stop sharing and just thank you for all of your time and just kind of hearing about our not fully cooked or fully baked products. So thank you, everybody. And I'll turn it back.
Thank you, Emil. Yeah, this was really awesome to actually get to look under the hood, so to speak, as you're working on developing these products. I mean, it looked awfully familiar with the many runs and many versions of classification and things like that. So right now we'll be probably moving into some question time so that we can also have people who are on YouTube also ask some questions. So I would like to first run this poll here, which asks, what was your top takeaway from the presentation? And please feel free to go to slido.com, #EEVM, and add some of your takeaways or lessons here. Yeah, definitely, for me, I guess being disciplined enough to both keep track of what your outputs are, but also what went into those outputs. I mean, being able to get the link to those, link to the code that produce those outputs, was very helpful for me to, kind of backtrack. And also, I know there's an option for adding a description to the output. If you're putting in your asset manager, there's also the chance to maybe stick in that line of URL or add some descriptions about what you put into or what classifier you use, and also naming them accurately. Here we have a few comments. Classification approaches each have their own pros and cons. Share your code access, and make nice maps. Work in a small country, yeah, good tip. Cooking and baking, okay.
That was me. I was cooking and baking.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, the question, how do we pick the best classifier? Like that's for my area or my purpose, right? Like you demonstrated, Emil, like there were some which were better for certain types of land cover, others were better for other types of land cover. Like being able to, discern and pick and deal with artifacts is definitely very challenging, and honestly can be intimidating for people who are trying this for the first time. And even if you have access to a lot of computational power on Earth Engine, it's still still can be challenging. So yeah, looks like we have a couple of takeaways here. And now I'm going to open up the questions so that you can also share your questions. So I'm going to head over to the live Q&A here and close the active poll. Yeah, so feel free again to type in your questions, and it should show up there once we have questions. And if you're in the Zoom room and you prefer to use the chat function, feel free to also post it there and I will read it out. So Fiona asks, so which of your examples had best accuracy compared to validation data?
Yeah, I'll be honest with you and say that we haven't even run the accuracy statistics on any of them thus far, but definitely something that we plan to do. I guess I come from the school of thought, as it were, where we kind of have two filters, which would one be kind of based on your own knowledge of these things. I think for a lot of it, you can already see where the errors are and then iterate based off of that. And then I think for a lot of these things, we haven't even, we haven't gotten to the stage where we're comfortable with with how they are in terms of that visual filter to then to do accuracy assessments on them yet. So that's, to be honest with you, where we are with some of that.
Yeah, thanks. And we have a question here as well on Slido. Have you considered combining approaches, for example, in a voting or agreement system between results?
Yes, have definitely considered it and looking into that. And I think that was it TC who also threw in some questions that are somewhat related to that. But yeah, and I guess besides saying that we do plan on looking into that. If anybody has any neat code on combining multiple classifications in terms of voting that they'd like to share, I'm not too proud to beg. Just kidding.
Yeah, I mean, one way that I would think of doing this is, say I had 10 runs with different methods. I put them all as 10 bands into one image and then get some kind of summary statistic. Generate some, majority or some kind of pixel-wise voting. I guess that's one way. So I'm going to read the questions in the chat out because I know the people on YouTube can't see this. So with reference to the choice of machine learning algorithm, I have two questions from TC. Number one, would you expect more black box models, such as deep learning, et cetera, to start beating decision tree-based classification as we add more training data? That seems to be the pattern seen in the overall AI literature. Second question, would you say it is better to use more interpretable models over black box implementations, even if that leads to a slight loss of accuracy?
Yeah, thank you, TC, for the question. And I guess for the second one, in terms of interpretable models, I would go back to what Allison posted there in the chat about, sometimes too, I think depending on what our purposes are and, how much accuracy we're looking at, I think that the default would likely be to go with the approach that's simpler, that gets us to, to some acceptable level of accuracy. So, if a super complex approach gets us to 95%, but the simpler approach gets us to 75%, I'm sure that some of us would probably go with the 70%. And then regarding the first question, I don't even know if I have a full answer for that one, but I often wonder where, the data, the input data, whether we're talking about the training data we're using or we're talking about the input imagery that we're using, is one thing. And then I just wonder about the, is it something where, as TC you're getting at, that if we throw in more training data, that will get us there, or is it something, and I've definitely seen other colleagues like David San and his shop at the University of San Francisco, where even before they go the TensorFlow route, they start to modify the inputs by adding in multiple types of indices, et cetera, as ways to, say, beef up on the input imagery itself. I wonder if other people in the community, like yourself, TC, have suggestions for us as to what you would recommend in terms of not just beefing up on inputs, or sorry, not just the training data, but do you think it's also something of, okay, well, let's start multiplying our input data by adding in all these additional simulated bands, as it were. So that's still kind of scratching my head on that one. Yeah, and then I saw some other questions in there. So again, sorry if I didn't offer a complete answer to that one, TC, but I also figured too, with your breadth of experience, that you might unmute yourself and kind of tell us what you think. Before I jump on that one, maybe before, I also saw Allison's question there, said, did you try using the TOA versus the SR? And she mentioned, not having level 2A data for the full time series on GE is an issue for her application. I and other colleagues have tend to find that depending on how complex or not complex your classification scheme is, that the TOA and the surface reflectance might give you really similar results versus other cases where the surface reflectance might give you worse results. And let me just quickly explain that one. What if you're only interested in forest, not forest, water? Maybe the TOA, I've seen it in Belize examples where with just a few classes, the TOA seems to be good enough. And in other cases too, where at times the atmospheric corrections, as it were, maybe they're overcorrecting and causing errors, when you use the surface reflectance data. So that's just my, kind of spin on that one. And I guess, should we proceed to the other questions? Do we
Sure. So I guess there's a comment on Slido that said we can get different results from different years too, even if the land cover has not really changed. So it's tricky. And then Muhammad has a question here in the chat. Without having any ground data for validation, can we use 70% of training samples for training the model and using 30% for validation of accuracy? Does it hold good for comparisons of classifiers with accuracy assessment?
Sure. By chance, do you want to take that one, Sabrina? Or I have seen quite a few examples from other folks where they were instead of using actual ground data, in situ data, they just take that training data and segment it, and as said, use a certain percent for the validation, etc. I'll just provide the caveat that that might not be the best use of the data, but I think everybody's aware of that. Like in the end, let's say I sample a map and I use part of that to quote unquote validate the map itself. I might not know what the accuracy of that is, and so by just kind of sampling that to use for my validation, I might be treating erroneous data as real data. And so there are other approaches that people are using, even ones that say aren't so effort intensive, like using tools like Collect Earth Online, where operators, as it were, can use high-res imagery, label it themselves, and then use that for validation. And of course, back in the olden days, the validation data we'd use would be stuff collected from the field where we really did verify, we knew that was X type of thing because we saw it with our own eyes versus looking at just high-res imagery. And I've also seen people in the community criticize too the idea of just using high-res imagery and not having that ground context. So, yeah.
Yeah, because even with high-res imagery, there are probably certain types of land cover or even shrub cover that is difficult to distinguish. For example, when people mapping sagebrush versus other kinds of shrubs in the US. Yeah, so I think this was probably the last question we had. And I think going back a little bit to your comment about, what if we beef up the input data before we look at using more quote unquote powerful classifiers. Yeah, choosing what input data to use is also difficult because ideally you want to select what you put in and not just throw in like 100 different types of indices or different other types of data, maybe elevation, slope, things like that are auxiliary. Because yeah, it's just really challenging to pick the right set of input data because you want that to also correlate with the thing you're trying to classify. So yeah, that's another challenge there. And I see TC as a comment here. I do think that the dearth of training data, particularly the even distribution of training across biomes and regions, way more training in the global north, for example, is a major issue with EO-based derived products, particularly relevant for global data sets. Another option may be to provide uncertainty levels for each classified pixel for more informed use of derived products by the community. Yeah, and I think there definitely are some good examples where uncertainty levels are provided in addition to the product itself. So that's definitely a good practice. And yeah, how do we keep track of error propagation if we are pre-existing maps or other data sources? Yeah, that's another question to think about. Allison says, I've tried optimizing band/index selection by using importance scores and then correlation matrices to improve correlated bands or indices with high importance. Yes, that's definitely a good thing to do. Yeah, so we are coming up on the last 5 minutes of the meetup. Are there any general troubleshooting questions that anyone would like to ask? I have unmuted everyone. So, I mean, given people the chance to unmute themselves. So if you'd like to share a question, describe your work, please also leave your maybe Twitter handle if you're on Twitter and introduce yourself in the chat so that, we can stay in touch afterwards. So do we have any, general questions or interesting resources that, you'd like to share with everybody? Feel free to either unmute yourself or put it in the chat or the Slido. Okay, I don't see anything appearing. So I'll give you all a few more minutes. Yeah. So Emil, for going back to like science communication, right? It's awesome to see the app that you made and shared, and probably got people who otherwise would not have interacted with this data to come and learn more about Belize. And what are some top tips, I think, for some of us here probably who are not on Twitter yet, to get started, and why is it a good community to be a part of?
Well, I almost feel like you can answer that question too, Sabrina, from geospatial women fame, and of course the work that you are doing leading the community as well. I just in a nutshell, just to say there's a community out there of people who are working on similar things to what those of us on the line right now are working on. And so there's opportunities to reach out, to share what you're doing, to learn from other people, to see nice code examples or what have you. And so, always encourage people to share what they're doing. And I think, particularly with EOChat, that's one of the things that we just like to see, where somebody says, hey, I'm working on X thing, just see this example of what we've done. And of course, we've seen really cool examples from different people whose names I recognize and have probably interacted with in the chat. Of course, you, Sabrina, TC, Vaishal, Rachel, pretty sure Fiona's also on Twitter, Gladys, etc. And so just, again, please feel free to just share what you're up to, even if it's just, here's this map that I generated using Earth Engine or with whatever other resources. And of course, Jennifer, it's always really helpful for just, kind of raising awareness of what folks are doing. And you never know, like you putting out an app or some code might help somebody else down the road with what they're doing. And I've definitely found so many great examples of code that people have freely shared and I've used and I will cite. Over.
Yeah, talking about citing, how do you cite code? Do you have any quick tips before in our last minute here?
I have no quick tips, but I wonder if like TC or you or Justin, I know Justin's not on right now, but might have suggestions.
Yeah, I think that would be really interesting. Then we can like, give people proper credit for the code that we based additional workflows off of. I mean, for me right now, I just put in the URL, the code URL, and if there was an author name there, I put it in my code, like this block was adapted from this and this URL by this and this person. And yeah, but over time it gets a bit unwieldy. So if we can have some code citation system, that would be really cool. Yeah. So thank you once again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Emil, for this great discussion. It's awesome presentation. So have a great rest of the day or evening, wherever you are, and see you all next time. All right, bye, everyone.